Okay, so Boker Tov, I don't know if you could see what I see on the picture. I'm trying to show you all the details on the picture, and let's see if you could pick up something that I will discuss as we continue with this class. So here we go. Let me put this down. As we always do, we start with a bracha. We start with a blessing on the amazing coffee that the Almighty put into this world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah bidvaro. My compliments to all those who answered Amen. So, the title of today's class, and 1 second, did I leave the Chumash out? I think I left the Chumash that I want to use, the Chumash meaning the Bible that I want to use and quote from that. I think I left it right outside my office. I will go get that in a moment. The title of the class is, and Noach became drunk, and it is about the past week's Torah portion and this coming week. I usually connect it. The past week, which is Noach, which is the story of the flood and everything that relates to it, and then the post-flood era. And over there, the Torah tells us that as soon as Noach comes out of the Teva, besides bringing a sacrifice and appreciation for God saving humanity and whatever was needed and necessary to rebuild the world, then the Torah relates that Noach went ahead and he planted a vineyard and he drank and he became drunk, he became intoxicated, and the Torah relates that in his state of intoxication, his youngest son Chum went ahead and performed something horrendous that prompted Noach to curse Chum, his fourth child, Canaan, which is why in the Talmud we have a discussion of what exactly is it that Chum did. And one of the explanations is that Chum went ahead, because the Torah uses the expression "Eis asher asa lo bnei hakoton," what his youngest child, or most disrespectful child did to him. And according to one opinion of the Talmud, he actually went ahead and he castrated his father, or did something that prevented him from having any more children. Which is why he cursed his fourth son, because he said, "You did not allow me to have a fourth child, and therefore I will curse your fourth son, which is Canaan." And this is the story that we find, the basic story. For, of course, more details on the story, you could open up the Bible in Parshat Noach, and you could read more details on this story, which prompted the conversation. And as you'll see shortly, this also is connected to the upcoming portion of Lech Lecha in a interesting way, as well as the upcoming portions that we read about Abraham, the first Jew, and what is it that, why was he chosen? But this prompts the conversation that I want to have today, a little bit of wine and alcohol, or in Torah, in Judaism, just some interesting thoughts. It's not going to be a comprehensive discussion. It's not the place. This is Sunday morning schmoozing, and it's a little bit lighter. But some interesting ideas and thoughts that I'm sure will be new to the listeners over here, to our good Facebook friends, because some of it was new to me as well. So give me a moment, because I left the Chumash right outside the office. It'll take me 10 seconds. So count from 10 to 9. Keep on counting, and I shall be back. Okay, so here we are. We are back in with the Chumash, a special Chumash that I want to use today. It's a very interesting Chumash, actually. It's called, and it's by a good friend of ours here in the community, by Mr. Yaakov Lev, who helped produce this Chumash. Chumash meaning what we might call in English one of the volumes of the Bible. And it is a very, very interesting Chumash, because unlike most of the other Chumashim and its commentaries, it has a unique set of commentaries which is based a lot on Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah and Chassidus, as opposed to some of the classic commentaries, which it also has but most of the other Chumashim do not have these commentaries. So I want to read to you the following. Okay, stay with me because this is a Torah class. So we always want to share from the Torah itself. Now, so here we go. And this is in Genesis, chapter 9, where's this? Chapter 9, verse 21. Okay? So here the Hebrew goes like this. Vayesh min hayayin, he drank from the wine, vayishkar, and he became drunk, vayitgal betoch ohalo, and he rolled, for lack of better translation, in is his tent. In Yiddish we would say it's gekeikult. So here we have a Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim is an amazing commentary. I don't like the term legend has it, but that's the common term. Legend has it. But sometimes when you say legend has it, it's like it's a legend and not necessarily true. And I don't like to use that term. So we'll say the story goes about the Baal HaTurim, that the commentary Baal HaTurim was written as a result of the following story. The Baal HaTurim was a fellow by the name, a tremendous, great scholar by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. We're talking about approximately, if I had to guess, approximately maybe 600 or 700 years ago. I don't know the exact date. And Rabbi Yaakov Kuli wrote a set called the Torah. The Torah is the forerunner to the Shulchan Aruch, to the Code of Jewish Law as we have it today. And the Torah was really the first who put together, after Maimonides, in its own unique style, the Torah put together a Code of Jewish Law, which is later the basis of the Code of Jewish Law written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo. And the Torah, when he wrote it, so the story goes, he wrote it sort of anonymously. And because he was humble and he didn't want to get fame, and he just did it for the mitzvah of writing. In that day and age, with no internet and with no smartphones and cameras and web and so on, when the Sefer came out, when his magnum opus, sort of the Torah, came out, so the scholars of the generation were tremendously impressed, but they didn't really know who the author was because he didn't really make that public or whatever it is. And so there was a fellow who was an imposter who went around from city to city, and in order to make a living, he would go and give speeches, what was called Musar speeches, words of inspiration, rebuke. And he started, in order to gain fame, after this book came out from the Torah, he started to identify himself as the Torah. He said, "I'm the Torah." And when the Torah heard this, meaning the real author of the Torah, which means column, the translation of Torah, the real author, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, heard about this. He said, "That's a problem already. If a person is using my name for his personal benefit, who knows what he will do with it? So therefore, I must go ahead and publicize that I am the author of this chibur, of this publication, this book of Torah, and so on." So he publicized it, but this imposter was not fazed. The imposter said, "No, you're lying." He says, he challenged him, and he said, "I'm the one who publicized. I wrote it." So the scholars, I guess, whoever was the main scholars of the era, of that period, of that place, were not sure what to do. So the Baal HaTurim of the commentary on the Torah, the reason why it was called the Baal HaTurim is because, as the story goes, in order to prove that he was the author of the Torah, Code of Jewish Law, he went ahead and he published, by divine inspiration, the commentary on the Chumash, on the 5 books of Moses, in one night. and he presented it to the scholars. And when they saw that he was able to produce such an amazing, insightful commentary in one night, they knew that he was a godly, inspired individual, and that established that he was the Baal HaTurim, he was the master, the owner of the one who wrote the Torah, and his commentary on the Torah came to be known as Baal HaTurim. So here you have a story that we were told still in the days in yeshiva, sharing that. And he very often deals with what's called either gematria, numerical value of different words, or words that say in different part of the Torah, and draws a lesson, parallel insight from words on the Torah that match. So in this week's, on this verse that we just read, that Noach went ahead and he planted. The verse right before with the one we just read, which was verse 20, it says, "Vayochal Noach ish ha'adama," and the man of the earth, Noach, went ahead and he planted. Vayochal Noach ish ha'adama. He went and he planted a korem, a vineyard, right? Vayita korem, and he planted a vineyard. So the word vayita, and he planted, says the Baal HaTurim the following, very short commentary. It says vayita gimel b'msora. There are three times that the Torah uses this expression vayita, and he planted, and we have it passed down b'msora that there's three places the Torah uses this term. So listen to this. Vayita Hashem Elokim gan be'Eden, and God planted a garden in Eden. So it says like so. There it says the following. So Vayita, God planted a garden in Eden, and over here, so there it uses the term Vayita, and he planted. He meaning God. Over here, Vayita, he planted, meaning Noach. That's two. Remember, there are three places, but so far we learned two. So now he continues. It's a two-liner. Darshu Rabbi Seinu, our teachers went ahead, and then it says, in number 3, the third place where it says Vayita is Vayita Eshel, and he planted an Eshel. Now, what is an Eshel? The commentary understands it over here, because there are various opinions. Vayita Eshel refers to the first Jew, Avram Avinu, which we learn about in this week's Torah portion, as opposed to last week's Torah portion, that Avram Avinu went ahead and he planted an Eshel. Now, what's an Eshel? As we understand it over here, Eshel means some sort of tree, some sort of a sapling or tree, as for the purpose of inviting having a place of comfort for guests. As we know, Abraham excelled in inviting guests, giving them food, making them comfortable, etc. So here it says these are the three places. Vayita Hashem, God planted a garden in Eden. Vayita Esha, Vayita Kerem, Noach over here who planted a vineyard, and Vayita Eshel, he planted an Eshel, which refers to Avram Avinu. Darshu Rabbi Seinu, our teachers, our rabbis of the Talmudic era, went ahead and they expounded on these three, the connection between these three Vayitas, and he planted. Mehechon lokachanatia, where did Noach get this was right after the flood, everything is destroyed, the whole world is destroyed, there's nothing growing. Where did Noach all of a sudden get a sapling or a tree to go ahead and plant a vineyard? So lokach hanatia migan Eden. He took the natia, he took the planting that he planted, and he made the vineyard from the Garden of Eden. That's the connection between the two Vayitas. V'chein Avraham, and also Avram Avinu, that he planted this somehow magnificent space for his guests, which is the Eshel, also got it from the Garden of Eden. So based on the Baal HaTurim, he says like this, that the Torah alludes to, because the Torah is full of in-depth hints. The way the Torah is written, it's God's book. Every word, every letter, every nuance, every pronunciation has meaning and insights on multiple levels. Here the Baal HaTurim gives us a new insight, which is that the three Vayitas implanted is to tell us, to allude to something that's already been passed down, that there's the Garden of Eden which God planted. The Vayita of the Garden of Eden is the same Vayita of Noah, and it's the same Vayita of Avram Avinu. Okay, get it? Now, let's go to the next one. And again, because we have here our friends and we have scholars, we could go to the next insight, which is like this, and this is connected. And then we'll go to the discussion of wine and alcohol. So if you're still with me, good. Let's learn a little further. Here is a quote from the Zohar. It's not, I don't think it's an actual literal quote. It's more a content taken from the Zohar. The Zohar says the following. And I'm skipping around a little bit and picking the pieces that relates more to our discussion. The Zohar being what we refer to as the Bible of Kabbalistic teachings, says the Zohar the following. Vayochel Noach isha adama vayita koren. Rabbi Yehuda says the following. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yehuda says the following: Sha'gefen nisgarshe began Eden v'noten mimene kerem. Rabbi Yehuda says, similar to what we said from the Baal HaTurim, that he took a gefen, he took a grape or a branch of the grape, or from the vineyard, which was there from when they were chased out, when Adam and Eve were chased out of the Garden of Eden for eating from the forbidden fruit, right? V'nota mimene kerem, and from it is what he planted and made a kerem, a vineyard. Then he says like this. Rabbi Shimon is the author of the Zohar, the famous Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Right? We're all familiar with the song Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the famous author of the Zohar, says like this: Yesh kan sod chachma. There's a sod of wisdom, which usually means a Kabbalistic. In the Zohar, that term usually means a more Kabbalistic insight. Why is it that Noach all of a sudden planted a vineyard? He had nothing to do. Now you could give the answer. You give the answer. Look, he just lived for a year with all these animals, and he was locked up. He was cooped up for all this time. That it's justified that by the time he comes out of the teva and out of the ark, with all that he had on his head, that he had to feed all the animals that God told him to bring into the teva, a sample of all of life, and he was in a teva for a year. You could understand that he has maybe a right to come out and drink himself to oblivion. But the Torah and the Zohar always has they don't look at things on that level. To them, Noach was a righteous man. What is he doing? What is he doing? First thing it comes out. The first thing, and the Torah tells us. There's a lot of things Noach did, I'm sure, when he came out of the Teva. He probably decided to build a house. There's a lot of things. The Torah doesn't tell us. But the Torah tells us that somehow he got so drunk that only after, he intoxicated himself. So Reb Shimon from the Zohar says like this: Yesh kan sod chachma. There's a much deeper insight over here. Kesherotza Noach lachkor bechet Adam Arishon. Noach, by planting this vineyard, he wanted to research and look into and understand the sin of Adam Arishon. Why? Kedei letaken et olam, in order to fix the world. What does this mean? I'm interjecting that the Zohar here is based on the fact that there are, as mentioned last week, there are various opinions of what is it that what was the forbidden fruit that Adam ate. Now the common lure, the common story that's told in the books and in the movies is that it was an apple. I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe, as mentioned last week, that there's a Jewish source for that it was an apple. I don't know that, I don't believe there's a Jewish source for that. According to the Jewish and Talmudic and Midrashic teachings, there are various opinions of what it was, and there is an opinion. There is an opinion that it was a grape. It was an opinion that was a grape, and it was a vineyard or a grape, even though the Torah refers to it as an eitz. So yeah, we do make a borei priya gofen when eating a borei priya eitz when eating a grape. We make a borei priya gofen when we have wine, because wine, because of its importance, it has its own blessing, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we make a borei priya eitz, so it's considered by Jewish law a tree, and that is the tree that God told him not to eat from. So interesting how this will soon sort of play into our class, into our subject matter over here. So the Zohar says the following. Listen to this. Adam went ahead and he ate from the forbidden fruit together with Eve. As a result, they were chased out of the Garden of Eden and they were banned. And then Noach is the only descendant from Adam. Everyone else is wiped out, and Noach is given the task to rebuild the world. So in essence, he is now the only one, and has the full responsibility of standing in and fulfilling that which Adam and Eve were created for. So he somehow, just like Adam and Eve, went ahead and they ate from the forbidden fruit, which in our understanding now, we're accepting the opinion that it was a grape. And somehow that is what caused their sin. And there is some in-depth understanding of what's going on over here. And there's a lot of that, by the way. So Noach, just as it relates to our discussion over here, Noach said, now my job is to rectify, to correct, to reverse that which Adam did. So I'm going to go ahead, as my first task, my holy obligation is to go ahead and plant a vineyard to overcome and to reverse the weakness that Adam fell through, Adam and Eve, and I will go ahead and plant, and by doing so, as the Zohar says, kedei letaken olam, in his mind, by doing so, I will be fixing the world. So Sochat Anovim, he went ahead and he squeezed, says the Zohar, he squeezed grapes, Livdok bo sokerim, to go ahead and check that vineyard. How the grapes became wine immediately is something that the Zohar addresses, that there was a miracle. V'gam hu nishtaker, and he also became intoxicated, which from the Zohar's connotation means that the intoxication means that he also fell from grace, sort of just like Adam and Eve did, and he messed up in simple vernacular. He messed up rather than fix the problem of Adam and Eve. So this is the Zohar. This is the Balaturim. I have limited time. I mean, this is a subject that we could discuss a lot, and there are multiple lessons. But I want to divert for a second within the context of this conversation and get back to the Balaturim and the Zohar and a lesson that could be learned amongst other lessons. The title of the class is Wine in Judaism, is it good or not good? So, like everything, or like many things in Judaism, not everything, like many things in Judaism, the answer is not that complicated, meaning it is all depends, the answer is depends how you use it. Let me give some examples. In the Torah we find, or in the Bible, and when I mean the Bible, I'm extending it beyond just the 5 books of Moses. Of course, we find somewhat both. Meaning, on the one hand, we just mentioned the story of Noach, where we see drinking was something that was so harmful. But if we also take the story that Avram Avinu went ahead and planted the Eshel, and according to the Zohar and according to the Balaturim, or the Balaturim actually, this refers to the same vineyard which was used to be welcoming and provide a pleasant atmosphere for the guests and give pleasure to the guests. So there we find a positivity. On the other hand, just a couple of portions down, we find the story of Lot getting intoxicated after God turns over and punishes the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Amorah as it's pronounced in Hebrew. And Lot gets drunk, and then his daughters have relations with him, and so there again we see the harmfulness of wine. In the Psalms it says, Yayin hamsamayach levav enosh, wine that brings gladness to the hearts of man, which is a pleasant and which is a compliment and a positive that the Psalms that is placing wine in. In Jewish law, we know that I'm going to a bris soon in a couple of minutes, A bris, one of the things we do at a bris is a baby naming, and we make the baby naming, we say the baby naming we announce the baby naming on a cup of wine. At a wedding, you have a cup of wine. Kiddush, you have to do on a cup of wine. Our sages said in order to provide greater honor to the Shabbat, we welcome in the Shabbat with a cup of wine. We make the Havdalah on a cup of wine. On the other hand, it is probably safe to say, not safe to say, on the other hand, in Jewish halacha and thought, the answer would be a cup of wine is good. Inebriation, to become drunk, is definitely condemned. And other than Purim is a little more complicated. Purim is the one time in the year where it gets a little more complicated. But throughout the year, if you look in Jewish law, if you look in the Talmud, and if you look at many other sources. In fact, over here I see there's a quote over here. I didn't look at it in the original Hebrew. I just say I see a translate. So this is from the Orchat Chaim, as quoted by the Beis Yosef. He says like this: inebriation is entirely prohibited, and there is no greater sin than drunkenness, and it is the cause of many sins. In fact, the Rambam, the famous Rambam Maimonides, and the doctor to the Sultan writes in a letter to his son basically the same concept, that being drunk and excessive drinking is what leads to all no good. So, in general, I would say that Jewish law says a cup of wine, yes. A bissel of wine when you have a simcha, Shabbat, oneg Shabbat, pleasure of Shabbat, etc. But to drink to a place where you become shikr, in Yiddish or Hebrew, definitely not. Now, in contemporary Judaism, one of the things that shuls or synagogues have had to deal with, especially in the Orthodox world, is what we call Kiddush clubs. Kiddush clubs have popped up all over the place with I would say, being frowned upon by most synagogue leaderships, sometimes acquiescing just out of to keep the peace, so to speak. But we're unfortunately excessive drinking occurs. In Hasidic world and so on, drinking. This has become a bit of a touchy subject. I would say like this: that in the Chabad world, being that Chabad originated from Russia. Drinking was like totally acceptable and almost part of the standard farbrengen, when a person could somewhat shed their inhibitions and be more open and brotherly and inspiring, etc., etc. So even there, the Rebbe in our generation put some very strict limitations on drinking, especially if you're under 40, and if a person knows that by drinking they will become vulgar, etc., then of course they shouldn't be drinking. And this, I want to go back to the sources that we discussed, which is the Balaturim and the Zohar. So it's kind of clear. There's nothing profound over here, but it's just the way Judaism usually approaches anything powerful and any innovation and so on. So there's an expression that the Talmud quotes from one of the verses. I don't recall exactly where, but the Talmud quotes this and says, "Nichnas yayin yatsa sod." When wine comes in, the secrets come out of a person. Or to use the expression in Yiddish, "Was a nichteren is eifen lung, is a shikeren auf den Zung." Which means that where someone who is sober is on his lungs, it's just the words rhyme. In Yiddish, is on his lungs. By someone drunk, it's on his tongue, lung, tongue. In Yiddish also, it's lung, zung. The words are related. So, nichnas yayin yotza soid was also used as a compliment that a little bit of wine. The Talmud talks about the fact that sometimes by taking a good piece of steak or having a cup of wine or whatever it is, that it broadens your mind, it broadens your thinking, it relaxes you, it opens you up, and deeper secrets, holier secrets come forth. So here, going back to the Noach to the Noach and Abraham, back to the Balaturim, which says that the same the same vineyard that was used by Noach, the same vineyard that was used by Noach was also used by Avram Avinu. It teaches us exactly that message. Noach went ahead and he took the sapling or the tree or the vineyard from the Garden of Eden where Adam failed, and he used it in a way that brought about failure, unfortunately. Avram Avinu, Abraham, went ahead and he used that same thing and he turned it into something where, as the Medrash and Rashi tells us, he would go ahead, anybody who would come to eat and to drink, he would do whatever he can to inspire them to become closer and thank God for all the blessings that they were being provided with. So the lesson over here is very, very simple. If the question in Judaism is wine good, wine is not good, obviously excessive drinking is harmful and is not condoned and is condemned by Judaism without a doubt. If somebody, through drinking wine, uses it in a positive way, like Avram Avinu did, uses it for a mitzvah, uses it to inspire, uses it to bring people closer, uses it in a way that he brings more friendship, etc., then you're like Avram Avinu, and it goes back all the way to the Garden of Eden. And perhaps that's why God originally told them not to eat from the forbidden fruit, which, according to this opinion, is the grape, is because of its potential tremendous destructiveness, which is why God told them not to. But once they got involved in sin, all of a sudden their mission and their purpose changed. And from that point on, it depends on our choice of how we use it. Like everything else, whether it's internet, whether it's radio, whether it's wealth, whether it's whatever wisdom, whatever talent we have, is it forbidden or not forbidden? In general, the approach of Judaism is, if God gives you a gift, if God gives something that's beautiful, there are exceptions, but in general, you should use it, and you should use it for goodness, you should use it for holiness. If you know you have the capacity for the proper self-control of both yourself and those you're using it with. If you cannot do so and assure yourself that those simple basic norms, and you become vulgar, you become destructive, you become rude, you become combative, etc. So obviously, in those cases, as we learn from Noach versus Avram, it is frowned upon. So that's that. Not frowned upon. Sorry, that's not enough of a strong language. It's actually condemned, and you should. The Torah says no, don't do that. Stay away from it. So that's that. That's today's learning. Just a little bit, broader insight from the parsha. And thank you so much for listening. We rushed through this a little bit. There's more that can be said. There's more lessons that can be learned from this whole story. Limitation of time. In Mitzvah Hashem, we'll see you again next week for Torah and Coffee. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful week. Use all the blessings, whether it's wine, whether it's talent, whatever you might have. Ask yourself, say, am I using this in a productive way, in a holy way, in a way that betters myself and those around me, or am I using it in perhaps a destructive way? That's a real question you have to ask yourself. And hopefully this Torah class inspires you to make the right to utilize it in the right way, or to use the language that the previous Rebbe quotes in Hayom Yom. He says like this: just like one must know their faults in order to correct it, one must know their positives in order to utilize it properly. With that, we will conclude. Have a fantastic, blessed week. Thank you for watching, and please share.